Hey everybody! I was surprisingly able to get right on here at noon today to do the live. Jen is going to watch a very exciting meet for her oldest daughter at college, so you all are stuck with me today. But we're going to be talking a little bit about Fit for Life physical therapy and why we choose to be out of network. So I'll wait a couple minutes. Hi, Jenna. Hi, Jen. I hope the drive is going well, Jen. So it's going to be a little bit of a close-up today because I'm actually going to be hanging on to the phone since I always have troubles with it flipping back and forth on me. But I realized something kind of recently, and that's because not only am I still kind of new to Fit for Life, but the fact that I'm no longer practicing in insurance is new to not just my previous patients, but a lot of my family and friends who have followed my journey through physical therapy. So the question kind of came about of, well, why don't you take insurance anymore? Or why does Fit for Life physical therapy not take insurance? And those are all good questions. So I'm going to try and hopefully clarify some of those for everybody today. So let's, without further ado, if you haven't heard by now, my background prior to joining with Jen and Fit for Life was primarily doing BWC, which is Bureau of Workers' Comp. It sounds very different. It's actually not. It's very similar to how insurance claims are treated. But that's not to say I never did insurance claims. I certainly did, and we also took personal injury, but for the purpose of this live, I'm going to leave personal injury out of it because that's a completely different type of conversation. So let's talk a little bit about what insurance means to physical therapy and just some of the nuances that go into it that maybe people don't see because a lot of them occur typically behind the scenes. So when somebody has insurance, it's not as simple as just going to a physical therapist and being able to start services or start treatment with them that day. When you want to use your insurance or have us bill your insurance for your actual physical therapy benefits, we have to start more often than not with a referral. Now, Ohio is one of those states that allows physical therapists to practice without a referral. It's called direct access, but we still have to contact the doctor and notify them that you're being seen, which we still do even outside of insurance, because again, outside of insurance, you're using direct access. But there is, for long story short, there is contact with the physician. However, in order more often than not to bill certain insurances like Medicare, Medicaid, and CareSource, they require the referral to be made by an NP, a PA, a physician, or somebody of that nature prior to you being seen. Now, for some people, it stops there with their insurance journey. They're able to get the referral, take it to a physical therapist. We do the initial paperwork on our end, and that's it, and they could start their care. Great. However, in some other cases, it's more than that. It requires what we call a prior authorization. So for certain insurances like CareSource, that's just the one that more frequently comes to mind because they made a lot of their changes before I left the insurance arena. But CareSource requires what we call a prior authorization. So you would come to, say, me for your physical therapy evaluation with your script from your MD or your PA or your NP. We would be able to do your evaluation, but then there's a 2-week waiting period where I have to submit further paperwork to request authorization for you to treat with physical therapy. And what that looks like is requesting permission for you to do certain modalities. Some therapists really like to use eStim or ultrasound, requesting for manual physical therapy. That's the things like Grestin and MYK that Jen and I do. Well, MYK falls under neuro, but You get my point. But you have to request for every single code, Therex, ADL training, patient education. You have to request for every single code. And they maintain the right to either approve or deny, or do what we call a partial approval, where they essentially addend the paperwork to allow certain codes and not others. Now, that is obviously a much more general picture than what actually goes into insurance. That's a very simplified version. But to kind of think to yourself, well, wow, that really is kind of a lengthy process and it delays care. I'm sure you can imagine that in a perfect world, there would never be the partial authorization, there would never be the denials, there would never be a full 2-week wait. And unfortunately, I'm here to kind of remind people that oftentimes it's longer than 2 weeks, and oftentimes there are denials or partial approvals, which can be frustrating for the patient and for the therapist alike. I know one of the things that I least liked about working for insurance as well as for the Bureau of Workers' Comp was that we very rarely were approved to do manual therapy. So things like Graston, myofascial releases, trigger point releases, dry needling especially. And even some insurances who do approve those treatments don't approve the ones that are more evidence-based in today's practices. Things like, again, Graston and dry needling. Now, how does that affect you? So for one, I'm sure you can imagine, or maybe put 2 and 2 together and think, okay, well, insurance is telling my therapist what they can and cannot do, but is that really the best course of care? Is that really the best course of treatment? Is that really what my physical therapist is recommending? Oftentimes the answer is no, because after that paperwork comes back, then we are essentially bound to that paperwork as far as what we can do and what we can bill for. And it alters our plan of care, sometimes drastically, which is going to change the outcomes for you. And again, can be very frustrating. Hi, Sandy. So a couple of other things too, is that you oftentimes have limitations when using your insurance on the amount of visits you can get with physical therapy. So I know frequently, I want to say Medical Mutual was 30 after prior authorization. Typically CareSource fell within the realm of 10 to 15. Medicare, Medicaid, a lot of people go by the cap, Medicare, Medicaid goes by the cap. Some people know that, some people don't. So there's a certain dollar amount that you can use, and then once you surpass that, you have to request for further authorization. So what all of this boils down to is that there's a lot of red tape. And unfortunately, I would love to say that it stops with therapies and rehabilitation services, but it doesn't always. Sometimes it can extend into pharmaceuticals, it can extend into imaging practices where there's just that red tape that's delaying care, and unfortunately we've seen how that can negatively impact people firsthand. So, on a more positive note, let's bring it back to Fit for Life. So when Jen started Fit for Life, she started it with the mission to provide the best possible care for anybody and everybody, regardless of insurance. And part of that is being outside of the network or working out of network. Now, that's not to say that you can't do something with our practice like a super bill or use your out of network benefits. You certainly can, but it's a principle that we choose not to go through insurances. And we choose not to go through insurances so that we can provide the best possible care for you. Really, the only regulation right now that we have to follow outside of normal physical therapy ethics, practices, responsibilities is to notify your primary care provider that we're seeing you in our office under direct access. And that's it. There's no red tape. There's no prior authorization. We can treat with manual physical therapy. A lot of you get that first day. I know I've definitely done some of my own favorite joint manipulations to help with the knees. Taping, Therex, the works. So I always smile because I never thought that I would be somebody who is working outside of the insurance system, but now that I am, I don't think that I could ever imagine myself going back, seeing how the other side lives, because sometimes the grass is greener. I know that saying goes, oh, the grass isn't always greener on the other side, but you know what? Sometimes it is. And I know it can be challenging to meet the financial expectations, but I do find too, and I'll speak for both of us and say, I think we're getting people better faster, and it may come as a surprise to some of our patients when we discharge them early, but it's certainly not a surprise to me. And I don't think it would be a surprise to Jen that we're able to do that because we're able to use all of the skills that we learned and were afforded as PTs. So I don't want to get too soapboxy on this Friday. It's a beautiful Friday. It's nice and sunny. But if you have any more questions for either of us about insurance, why we're out of network, just know that it is a choice that we choose to make to be out of network, and it's really in your best interest. But there are options as well that you can seek out for billing purposes. So I think pretty soon you'll see me back on social media a lot more. I had a pretty big project, I'm sure you're all aware, to get off the ground as soon as I came back, and that was Furniture Warehouse. So I'll be posting a lot more lately. And one of my plans is to actually kind of bump away from sharing on specific days, on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and to just share whenever the posts move me. So I think I'm going to summarize what we talked about today so that everybody can see it in writing, and as well as go into depth a little bit more in my posts about how imaging referrals and pharmaceuticals and stuff are also impacted by insurance. So be on the lookout for that, as well as some more pictures that I'll be sharing to my page of the grand reopening and Furniture Warehouse, lots of fun stuff. But yeah, so that's all for this Friday. Jen, good luck to Bree. I hope she runs really well, and I hope you all have a beautiful weekend.